killed 40 of them. The Polish patriots were hooligans from what they call Armia Krajowa, the army of the land, that affiliated with General Anders, who was the London led leader of the Free Polish Army, which was in competition with the Soviet-sponsored Polish Army. And these two factions were fighting one another. And when they two fight it, they let it out on the Jews. So when I heard that, I said, my God, it's 1 year after the end of the war. It's almost 2 years after our liberation from the camp. Now I have to hear about another pogrom. I'm not going to stay in Poland, period. I want out. We want to go to the West. So as soon as the semester ended in June 46, Natalie was already pregnant with our first baby. We collected whatever few things we had, mostly my books and some clothing, and we got to a town on the Czech border, the Polish side of the Czech border, and then moved across the border at night into Czechoslovakia. From there, we went by train to Bratislava, crossed the border to Austria on foot, moved by train to Vienna, and then from Vienna to Linz in the American zone of Austria. A transit camp, and thence to Munich and Stuttgart. We ended up in Stuttgart in August, about a month and a half after we started.
Stuttgart, August 49?
Not 49, 46.
Oh, 46, I'm sorry,
Yes.
46.
And I enrolled in the University of Stuttgart, and I tried to enroll Natalie in a hospital for delivering the baby, which was due in November. And they told me that there are no facilities available. If I can come back next year, they'll see what they can do.
If she could hold a baby in that long?
Yeah. So she ended up delivering the baby in a school for midwives. So in Stuttgart, I was a student. I finished my studies. It took another 3 years. I got my diploma engineer education, and I decided to apply to the United States for immigration. We did that in early '49, and when I got my diploma in '49, the process was going at full speed, and by again August '49 we landed in New York on a American Army transport ship. Stayed in New York 1 day, and that night we were put on a train for Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I came to Milwaukee. The Jewish Federation, Jewish Family Service, had anticipated my arrival, or our arrival. They had a room prepared for us, and we started life in America in a single room on 3rd Street in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I didn't know the language. I didn't know the people. Didn't know the situation. I thought I was coming into a position, a job as an electrical engineer, someplace in the industry, but that was only it was only an entry in a paper to get the immigration officer satisfied. Once we got to Milwaukee, there was no job waiting for me. There was, there were handouts waiting for me. Every week, for a number of weeks, we would get a few dollars to buy groceries. We never had any arguments with Natalie, but on this item we did argue. When the time came to pick up the money, the weekly allowance, I wanted her to go, she wanted me to go. So we argued.
Why the conflict?
We're not used to accepting things as charity, So I went to school, night school, to start learning the language. And I started looking for some work. Television was big in 1949. It was entering the market with a splash. And there was a store in Milwaukee, the Samson's appliance store, that was the biggest television marketeer in the area. And somebody in the Jewish Family Service suggested, maybe you can do that. Now, the first time I saw a television set was in the United States in a display window after we arrived. So he said, television? I don't know television. He says, you're an engineer, aren't you? I said, yeah. Well, I'll get you some books. He brought me a number of schematics of the different television sets. I studied that for about a week. And then he said, sure, I'm a specialist in television. And they gave me a job repairing television sets. And I got to be pretty good at it, to the point where I developed my own clientele, where people would come in and say, I want him to fix it. He did it well last time. So anyway, it was a temporary situation. It would carry me until beginning of 1950, the beginning of 1950. And then I noticed that Alice Chalmers Manufacturing Company is advertising for draftsmen. So I applied for a draftsman position. I took a little cut in salary, compared with my television repair work. But I wanted to get into an engineering organization and not a sales organization or a service organization. So I started working at Alice Chalmers as a draftsman, and then the chief engineer kind of noticed some things that I did, so he asked me where I learned this stuff, and I told him at the University of Stuttgart. He says, well, you don't belong here, you belong in my department. And a week later, I was in the engineering department, designing transformers for Allis-Chalmers, and then designing a Betatron for Allis-Chalmers. And I stayed at Allis-Chalmers until 1953. But still, it was engineering and it was electrical, but it was not my field. My field was electronics and communications. And I wanted to end up there. So RCA was advertising for engineers by then. But then I've learned a little bit of English, and I could communicate with people. And obviously, I could persuade some people, because they brought me for an interview at at RCA, and within a couple of days I had an offer as an engineer to work in the microwave communication division. I accepted that. I worked with RCA for 5 years, and I went for a vacation from Tucson, which was my last location at RCA, to San Francisco for vacation, and I got so impressed with the city in Northern California. I said, I don't want to stay in the desert anymore. I want to move to Northern California. There was an ad from Lockheed Missile and Space Company looking for engineers. This is now 1956. And I applied, and I got accepted, and I moved to Northern California. That was my last move. I have been there since 1957.
What would you say your main accomplishments have been? I mean, to sum up all the technical things you've been doing, what are the main things that you're proudest of that you've achieved? It's quite a resume, of course.
Well, there are a few things there is a difference between being proud of something that you do or being proud of something that you help make happen. Okay? Because once I started at Lockheed, they put me off in a separate little office, because in my resume from RCA, I wrote about my communications experience with microwave communications and television. And the problem at that time in the missiles programs was telemetry. And telemetry is communications, okay? And there was an old style telemetry system standard in the industry at that time, very inefficient, heavy, expensive. They said, do you think you have some ideas there? And